Hello and welcome to our virtual Lunch and Learn today. We'll be talking about modern OT computing platforms for industrial automation. My name is Rachel Green and I'm the Digital Communications Specialist here at McNaughton-McKay Electric Company. And presenting for us today will be Muncie Slack, Systems Engineer with Stratus Technologies. Out in the comments section, ready to answer your questions, is McNaughton-McKay's System Engineer, Justin Wyman. We'll also have a Q&A portion at the end for Muncie to answer your questions in more depth. We'll be getting started shortly, but we'd like to allow a few minutes for attendees to join us. As you come in, and let us know where you're tuning in from in the comment section. You can view recordings of previous virtual Lunch and Learns on our YouTube channel under the Virtual Lunch and Learn playlist, and we cover a new topic every Wednesday at noon, so be sure to join us on your lunch break. For anyone just coming in, welcome to our virtual Lunch and Learn today, Modern OT Computing Platforms for Industrial Automation. Let us know where you're joining us from. We'll be looking for your questions as you have them in the comments, while our presenter Muncie Slack of Stratus Technologies tells us about Stratus's computing technologies and how they can help you easily deploy and manage an IT environment in the OT world. Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining. Our specialist, Justin Wyman, is ready to respond to your questions out in the comments as we go along, and we'll have a Q&A segment at the end of Muncie's presentation as well. If you'd like to reach out afterward, or if you have further questions, you can always send us an email at that email address there on the screen, macandmaclive@mc-mc.com. Just be sure to let us know which session you attended. We'll have that email address on the screen at the end for you as well. Hi, Andy. Hi, Justin. See you out there. Great. It looks like we have quite a few attendees with us now, so let's go ahead and get started. Muncie, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you. Again, my name is Muncie Slack. I'm a systems engineer with Stratus Technologies, and wanted to thank everybody for showing up today for the Lunch and Learn. We're going to go over hardware platforms that allow you to deploy applications in the OT environment and show you how they can be done in an easy way that's not so IT-centric. First, a little bit about Stratus. For those of you that don't know us, we've been around for, I guess, going on 41 years now. Started in 1980, and we're in most any industry that you can think of. We've got over 12,000 active support customers, many Fortune 100 customers as well, and a lot of water, wastewater, transportation, and 45 million passengers daily. So what is it about Stratus and what are we trying to accomplish in the OT world, and why are we targeting OT with what we have? A lot of it is because of what everybody's kind of hearing a great deal about, and that's digital transformation and its drive for edge computing. The cloud is becoming a big focus for a lot of manufacturing facilities and getting that data up there and accessible and doing analytics. The problem is with cloud computing, it's not connected to the manufacturing environment necessarily in a stable way. Sometimes you have a lot of challenges when you try to put your data in the cloud. And that could be, lack of connection. You could have limited bandwidth, high latencies, downtime, and if you're using your data on a regular basis to make decisions and you don't get access to that data, then it kind of makes it hard to make a good decision. If you take a look at Gartner, they're saying 75% of data will be created and processed outside the data center or in the cloud by 2022. So that's next year. What we believe is a better solution than putting everything in the cloud is having computing done at the edge. And by edge, that's a kind of a term that's been thrown around a lot. And our definition of that is something outside the data center, at the point of manufacture, or outside of even a traditional environment. It could be out in a field somewhere that's miles away from any typical IT environment. And whatever manufacturing is going on, it's gathering that data. And we believe that processing that data at the point and then sending it up to the cloud from there is a smarter solution, and I'll explain why. 75% of data is going to be created and processed outside the data center, and 50% of new IT infrastructure is going to be edge-based computing. Those are data from Gartner and IDC. And so what are some of the challenges that edge computing is going to bring from an infrastructure standpoint? Well, that's people and skills. A lot of this is very IT-centric stuff, and the OT guys don't have a whole lot of training and knowledge on how to manage it, but they end up with the responsibility for it. So you've got to find, if you've got an IT-centric environment, then you've got to find resources that know both OT and IT. And a lot of times, even if you do have an IT department involved, they may or may not have a lot of knowledge of your world, and there's a disconnect between what's acceptable to you and what's acceptable to them, and with relation to availability. You've got issues with longevity of equipment. When you put something in manufacturing environment, you want it to stay and not have to swap it out every 3 to 5 years. IT is kind of used to 3 to 5 year rotation of hardware. For the OT world, that can be pretty disruptive and not something that they think of budgetarily. A lot of times you're going to want them to run for 10 plus years or more. Reliability is a big deal too. When something goes down in the OT world, you don't have a lot of flexibility with being able to get yourself back up and running. When you lose something at the core, the ripple effect of manufacturing and processes and everything else that depend on that end up costing you more money down the road that's not necessarily related to data, but related to your downtime and the impact to your employees and people on the plant floor. So you've got to make sure that whatever you're deploying is reliable and can stay up and running. And when you refer to unplanned downtime and availability, what does that kind of mean in percentages? Most non-redundant computers are marked at 99.5%, and that's roughly 2 days of downtime a year. That can be quite a big challenge in the OT world if you've got 2 days of downtime. So having a standalone computer typically doesn't work very well. The next kind of benchmark is cloud availability goal, and those are typically 99.95%, and that's roughly 4.5 hours of unplanned downtime on average per year. Better, but still, if you're in pharmaceuticals or something that requires constant data management, or else you've got to throw out a batch because you couldn't monitor it, then that can be very expensive. And then you've got clustering, which is typically what you see IT recommending to OT environments. And clustering is, a couple of servers and storage and active passive, one failing over to the other. That'll give you anywhere, 99.99 is 4 nines, which is about an hour a year, which is okay, unless, again, that amount of downtime is very costly. Where Stratus plays is typically in the 5 to 7 nines of availability. That's just a little over 3 seconds a year. And if you go to our website, we've got an uptime meter that shows all of our servers worldwide, and they're currently running at 99.99997%, which is less than 3 seconds of downtime across the world. So we've always focused on availability, and that's why we believe our products are well suited to OT, because they run like you do all the time. If you take a look at the solutions that are out there, kind of summarizing the different levels that I just went over, no solution or single standalone over on the left is what a lot of places may or may not have historically. Your IT solutions are in the middle with clustering or virtualized HA, running some sort of virtual SAN technology. But either way, you've got an active and a passive node. And when something fails, you have to restart everything on the other side. And that can take anywhere from 30 seconds to 30 minutes. Depends on what's there. And then the OT focused solution is what Stratus brings to the table. With no single points of failure, no failover from one side to the other. It's a fully fault tolerant platform or a continuously high availability platform in the ZTC Edge. So that's kind of where we're coming from and the target that we're making. And so let's get into the products themselves. The first one I want to talk about is FTServer. FTServer is our, I guess, kind of big iron type solution. It fits in your server rack and goes into particularly a control room or even maybe a server room, depending on how large the facility is. Let's talk a little bit about what it's not. It's not a cluster. A cluster is what, as I said earlier, you typically see recommended by an IT department, and it's probably what we compete with 9 times out of 10. You've got 1 or 2 or 3 different servers all connected together in a network via redundant switches. You've got redundant storage that sits in the middle of that and is shared across all 3 platforms. You've got 3 licenses for VMware, if that's your virtualization hypervisor or whatever platform you may have. And then you've got individual operating systems in the virtual machines that sit on top of those hypervisors. And you've got to take a look at licensing costs when you do clustering, because Microsoft and VMware require you to license each individual node in the system. So if you've got 6 virtual machines, you have to have 6 licenses for each of those on each node. So that's 18 total if you've got 6 VMs. If you've got 3 server nodes, you've got to go with 3 copies of VMware, and it's got to be their expensive copy of either Essentials Plus or higher, and you've got to license that on each server. So there's a lot of licensing involved, there's a lot of connectivity involved, and a lot of IT-centric design. It works when it works, but when it fails, you've got to know what to do. So let's see what FTServer is and how it compares to that scenario. With the FTServer, we took a traditional x86 server and then enhanced it with our always-on processing solution called the automated uptime layer. And that's kind of our secret sauce. It sits between the hardware and the operating system kernel and manages and monitors all points inside of a system. So we have an insight into everything going on at the hardware level. Then using that AUL combined with some field programmable gate arrays, FPGAs, and a little bit of custom firmware, we duplicated the environment and then lockstepped it and created synchronous processing. And the way we duplex our hardware is by setting up a process that allows both halves of the system to process the same transaction at the same time on the same clock cycle. And both halves of the system will respond to an operating system request. So you don't have an active passive or a failover scenario. Both halves do the same thing at the same time. And what that provides is synchronous processing, whether it's in the IO side or on the processing side. The good thing is, because of the way we do this, everything is operating in sync and acting like a single piece of hardware. And so from Microsoft standpoint, from VMware standpoint, from your user standpoint, from Rockwell standpoint, everything is one platform. So you don't need the advanced hypervisor technology that comes with Essentials Plus or Standard or Enterprise Plus. You can use the base Essentials kit for your hypervisor, or you can just use Standard Hyper-V if that's what you want to go with. For licensing of the Microsoft VMs, you only need to license them one time because we don't move between the two. We actually run in synchronous processing on both halves. Microsoft and VMware have both documented and recognized the FTServer as a single platform. So when you're looking at this from a cost standpoint, you buy an FTServer once and you're done with all the licensing and everything one time. Whereas a clustered solution, you're buying multiple licenses and multiple pieces of hardware and putting it all together. And then you have to set the software up to do your redundancy. Whereas with an FTServer, we're doing the redundancy at the hardware level. So the admin doesn't have to worry about creating that replication tool. We're doing it automatically. And every VM that you put into an FTServer is fully fault tolerant and fully redundant. And none of them even really have to worry about, are they on redundant platform, because it's done under the hood. They don't see it. They just see an operating system like they would any other server. Any questions at this point on the hardware technology and sort of what an FTServer is and does compared to a cluster?
We don't have any questions in the chat at this time, but I can unmute and let you know if we do.
Okay. Well, then
I will
we
let
can
you
move
know.
on.
I'll let you know if any come in.
Okay, great. So I'll move on to the how you deal with an FTServer if there is a failure. If in the event that something happens and it is a server, it's traditional, does have traditional components and technology, and things do occasionally fail. When they do, the FTServer will isolate that fault and take it out of production. It does not stop production though. Say a CPU fails, well, in the top half of the system, well, that half is taken out of production. The bottom half continues to operate, so you don't have to fail over from one to the other. It just keeps going. Your users don't know anything happened. The operating system doesn't know anything happened. It just keeps on doing whatever it does. At the same time, the system will automatically order the correct replacement part for next day delivery. And that happens through either an internet-based phone home solution that's built in with every FTServer. It's a one-way outbound only communication with us, and we will send one of three components. We'll either send a hard drive for you to swap out. We will send half of the system, so the entire top half in this case would be sent, and it's fully modular. So while the system is running, you unplug this half that's got the failure, slide it out, set it off to the side, put the new half back in, pull the drives out of the old, put it in the new in the same slots. Once you lock it down, plug it up, it automatically starts that half of the system and begins to synchronize the two by itself. You don't have to go in and tell it to rebuild anything, to set anything back up. It does it automatically. And then once everything is back in sync, it locksteps it back into duplex mode, and off you go. You ship us back the bad half. The third piece that could be sent, if it's not a drive or a crew, which stands for customer replaceable unit, is going to be a power supply. And sometimes we may just send you out a power supply, which is externally accessible, and you swap it out in the back, and it's hot plug as well. So again, for any time you may have a failure or an issue in an FTServer, you don't lose production. It doesn't go down, it doesn't stop, it continues to operate. You compare that to a clustered solution. When you have a node in a cluster fail, everything has to restart on another node. So your application is unavailable for 30 seconds to 3 minutes or whatever time it takes for all those services to restart. You've got to, all your clients have to reacquire connectivity. You've got to get somebody out from Dell or HP or whomever to repair the system, and they come through your security on site, start swapping boards. Hopefully they get it built and put back together properly. And hopefully you don't have to reinstall the operating system and reconfigure it for VMware and for vMotion HA and all that stuff. You've got to get everything back up and running the way it was, and then move your VMs back to where they belong. If you're in IT, that's something you kind of do on a daily basis, and is easy to do. If you're not in IT, then that may be kind of daunting, and you're going to need some assistance, or you just don't really have the time because you've got to build things. So there's a lot of reason that you don't want things to fail in an IT type solution. So that's once everything's back up and running, normal process continues. Once you do it and you send us back the system. I mentioned that it does a phone home, and there's a lot of ways we can do that. The call home feature that's internet based. There's also a secondary option if you want that can do a old school 56K modem dial up type of scenario for that same phone home. If you need a local notification and you've got an email server nearby, you can do local emails. We also support OPC UA. So if you have an OPC gateway and an HMI alarms inside your client, then you can pull that information in from the OPC server on one of our guests, and one of the guest VMs, and it'll get you the information you need, whether the system's healthy or not. So to summarize, the FTServer platform is fully redundant with lockstep hardware that does everything under the hood, so you don't have to set it up for redundancy in the software. It's a single system and a single license with no failover time. It's operationally simplistic, and it's got a much longer system life and usability life than your traditional server class systems. We've got many servers that have been out there, 7 to 10 years. It seems to be the average rate for us. Some people swap them out as early as 5. Rarely is it before that. We have some that have been out there for 12 years. And so as long as you're on support for an FTServer and you're keeping up with that annual maintenance program, we guarantee that you'll have components for your hardware, and we will be able to send you a crew or a hard drive or a power supply in the event that something fails. And so when you look at your total cost of ownership, we're much lower than everything else because we just keep running, and we guarantee as a partner that we're going to maintain the system that you have. There are currently 3 different models of FTServer you can choose from. You've got a 2910 as the entry level, a single 10-core CPU, FTServer 4910, which is dual socket 10-core CPU, and then the higher end 6910, it's a dual 16-core socket. So you can have anywhere from 20 vCPUs upwards to 72 vCPUs, anywhere from 256 gigs of RAM to 1.2 terabytes, and multiple hard drive options, including 800 gig SSDs, 600 gig 15K drives, and then we've even got 1.6 terabyte NVMe's if you need the really fast, super expensive hard drives in order to run your environment. Then that's what we can offer you if you need it. You've got multiple Ethernet ports and expandability inside all of them, as well as USB and serial, just like you would anywhere else. They all support VMware vSphere 6.7 and 7.0, as well as Windows Server 2016 and 2019, and Red Hat Linux 7.6 and prior. From a support standpoint, I mentioned our annual support. We have 3 different levels. You've got total assurance, system assurance, and extended platform support. You've got really the total assurance is the white glove solution, and it's what anybody that needs the ability to not just know that something happened, but what happened, and to make sure it doesn't happen again for root cause analysis. That's included there, as well as full OS support, including patches and updates, and vendor collaboration, in that if we have an issue with Windows Server or VMware ESXi, we work with those 2 software vendors to make sure that they get whatever it is fixed and get that put into the final release of the product. We do have emergency on-site response in the event that you have a failure that can't handle, that for some reason won't come back up. Then we do send somebody on site. Most of the time, that doesn't happen. Everything that you need to do to repair it, you can do yourself. 30-minute, less than 30-minute response times for both hardware and software support, and then 24/365 incident response and proactive system monitoring. Each of them come with the phone home support that I talked about. The middle support, is system assurance, and that provides all the root cause for the hardware, but does not include the OS support that you find in total assurance. And then extended platform support is kind of break fix, and that is no root cause, but we make sure it's always running. We give you the phone home capabilities, and we will respond to any request for critical support in 2 hours or less. And we still provide the phone home and the advanced parts exchange. And that is FTServer. Any questions on FTServer in general, or anything that we've talked about so far?
We don't have any questions right now in the chat, but I will definitely unmute and let you know if any come up.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on from FTServer, FTserver's a great platform if you're running anywhere from 4 or 5 VMs all the way up to 40 some VMs. But what if you've got to go down and you really don't have a lot of compute, but you need it to be easy to deploy and manage long term? How do you do that and still get something that's easy and reliable? So we decided that in order to get there, we had to kind of rethink what we were doing from a hardware standpoint and come up with something new because there wasn't anything out there doing it. And what we designed and developed and deployed was ZTC Edge. ZTC Edge is, as it looks like, a ruggedized workstation type device. But the difference between this and your typical industrial PC is that instead of running Windows software, Windows Workstation or Windows 10, Windows 8, we actually created our own virtualized hypervisor out of Linux and KVM and created Stratus Redundant Linux. And so this is a fully virtualized microserver that comes out of the box ready to deploy virtual machines in a redundant fashion. Everything is built in from the factory. You don't have to install the operating system of the host. You don't have to create that redundancy and the replication in there. It's already set up and designed for that. It's very OT focused in the way that it was built. From an implementation standpoint, when you get them, you'll get 2. And basically it comes with this big piece of paper that gives you kind of the pictures and some words, just like if it was a printer, on how to set things up. And we architected it in such a way that anybody can set it up. We actually have a video of one of our marketing guys, 11-year-old kids, putting it together, and he managed to pull it off in 30 minutes. So it really is pretty straightforward and simple from the process deployment perspective. You take them out of the box, you plug in the first one to a keyboard and monitor and do the initial setup. After about 10 minutes and 3 questions, it asks you to connect the second node. You connect that, answer a few more questions, and it starts mirroring the 2 on its own. Once it's up and running, you disconnect the monitor and keyboard and you access it just like you would any server through a browser or through your client. It's not something you would plug in a keyboard, monitor, and mouse to and use directly. It is a server, so you're going to be accessing it through either Chrome or Edge and hitting an IP address. And it looks, if you're used to managing virtual machines inside of a virtual machine host, then this will be very familiar to you. And it can run anywhere from 1 to 4 virtual machines in a high availability environment. And by high availability, that means the VM resides on one and replicates to another. And if something happens to the one, then it restarts on the other. And so there is a bit of a failover in the HA version. We do have a model that supports FT. So if you need fault tolerance, we can do that in this environment as well. And that provides microsecond transition from one node to the other, so no outage, no noticeable outage on your part. As far as how the VMs are deployed, it supports Windows or Linux operating systems, and you can load this through either a traditional ISO. If you've got the Microsoft's Windows Server ISO, you can build it just like you would any other virtual machine. If you've got VMware templates, you can deploy it using OVF and OVA files and just do an import. And our operating system has a tool built in that will convert those OVA files to the Linux version of virtual machines and convert them on the fly and drop them into the environment and turn them on and off you go. So it's a very simple, straightforward process. You don't have to build the clustering environment yourself. It's automatically done, and every VM that you put into a ZTC is automatically going to be in a high availability environment if you get the dual node solution. Why did we go with virtualization? Well, you get your most bang for your buck. It's kind of the things that you would expect, as opposed to having one piece of hardware that does one thing and one thing only. And if it fails, then you've got to rebuild it from scratch and spend days trying to get yourself back up and running. Through virtualization, you can run multiple lightweight environments, such as thin clients, and get them deployed easily and managed and maintained easily. So if you're doing Thin Manager, then you've already got the endpoints virtualized essentially. So you've got little pucks with the keyboard, monitor, mouse connected to it, and then by virtualizing the backside of the server with a ruggedized microserver, you now have everything kind of hot swappable. So you don't have any single point of failure that's going to bring down your whole system. You just have to swap out components and let things resync in order to maintain your environment. So it makes a lot more sense. As I mentioned, these come in either HA or FT mode. If it's HA, we replicate the storage through high availability checkpointing. And if we're doing fault tolerance, then that's state pointing, and we're replicating not just the storage, but the memory and the processing. And so everything is continuous processing from one side to the other. And with the proper bandwidth and configuration, you don't have any outage whatsoever using a ZTC Edge solution. As you would expect, because it's a ruggedized PC form factor, you can mount it on DIN rails inside your control panel, or you can mount them in a control room on a shelf of a server rack, or you can do both. You can put one in a control panel and one in a control room, or wherever you need to away. So if you want to geographically distribute them and put them in multiple places so that you've got some resiliency from local outages, you can do that as well. They are industrial rated, anywhere from -40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, with 95% humidity and 3 GRMS vibration ratings. Again, everything's hot swappable and self-recognizing and auto-synchronizing. We had the same process here and mentality when we built it with regards to correcting a failure. If you have a problem with the node and the node goes down, or even may look like it's going to go down, and we may have to proactively restart on the other side, we will do that. But anything that's on a node that fails gets restarted on the other node, and you're back up and running, or continuously running if it's an FT. The ZTC does have the ability to phone home or phone local, depending on what you need. And when it sends out the notification that it's got a problem, we ship an entire node as a replacement. So you don't get like a piece's parts that you got to crack into the case to replace. You just get another brick. And you pull the old brick off the wall, put the new one in and plug it up, push a button to turn it on. The previous node, or the one remaining, recognizes its new partner and begins to synchronize between the two, and puts it back into HA mode once everything gets synced. So again, you don't have to go in and rebuild and reinstall or whatever. It's still a hot swap scenario, and you don't lose production time in your rebuild, and everything gets back up and running. The same's for updating. If you've got to update the system to a new firmware level or a new version of Stratus redundant Linux, it'll do that with a hot live migration of everything from one node, update that node, and then it'll move everything off the backup node to the primary node and update that one, and then just redistribute everything the way it's supposed to. So again, it's non-disruptive and doesn't impact your manufacturing environment or your data recording environment. We currently have two models, the 100i and the 110i. The 100i is the entry level. It comes with a 4-core i7 CPU, up to 32 gigs of RAM and 512 gigabytes of SSD storage. For larger environments and for the FT environment, if you need that, you've got the 110i, which has a 6-core i7 CPU, 64 gigs of RAM, and a 2 terabyte SSD. Both processors are hyper-threaded, so that means you have 8 vCPU in the 100i and 12 vCPU in the 110i. Typically what we've seen is, a lightweight, thin manager environment combined with your HMI and a historian or domain controller, kind of where you're basically having small compute environment right at the point of manufacturing. Again, both of them are pretty much the same from here. The 110 does have more network points and faster A links or private links in order to do that fault tolerant replication. The 110i is class 1 div 2 compliant. So if you need that certification on your hardware, we can provide that with a 110. And both are standard and very rugged machines. The UI for Stratus Redundant Linux provides great usability and visibility into your systems and applications. You can look at it from the hardware level of both, looking at it as a single pane of glass for the whole environment. You can monitor each individual CPU utilization or memory utilization from each node. You can even do that all the way down to the virtual machine level. You can set up your thresholds for whatever alerts you need to know, like do you have a VM running hot? Maybe you've got something that's not right at the guest level. We can create alerts that allow you to see that, and you can manage everything on the fly. There are 2 support options with the ZTC solution. You've got system support, which is your base support, and it's 24/7 web, phone support, 30-minute critical response times, advanced part exchange, and root cause determination. It's got phone home local, which means you can have it set up so that either through OPC UA, REST APIs if you're more web-based, or traditional SNMP traps in order to do the notifications of system issues locally. And so someone at your facility would get that notification and then contact us and say that they've got an issue. And we typically see that for facilities that have really tight security lockdown and don't allow any type of outbound communications. If you do allow outbound communications and need more oversight from us, we can provide system health plus system support. And that provides all the same things that you get with system support, but you also get phone home to us. So it'll send a weekly heartbeat or an immediate triage help signal to us over the internet and let us know that there's a problem. And when we get it, then we immediately start the order process for a new node and get that shipped out to the site next business day. And that way it really kind of takes you out of the loop as far as having to get things fixed. We send it to you and you go out and do the swap yourself. Our support team is there if you need assistance while that process goes on, and then you ship us back the dead node. If you have media retention requirements such that you have to keep and destroy your own hard drives, then with system health and system support, you get that, and you just pop the hard drive out and send us the shell that's left and destroy the hard drive however you need to.
Muncie, we do actually have one question I'd like to read out for you.
Sure.
Justin asks, can you use just one ZTC node, no redundancy? And if so, can you later add a second node if redundancy becomes crucial?
Yes and yes. So we sell them individually, and with that you get the hypervisor layer. You get the ease of deployment, ease of management, just like you do in a dual node system. It's half the cost, and in a lot of cases that's a great way to kind of get started. It allows you to deploy your 1 to 4 VMs in a nice simple package. And if down the road you decide, you know what, I do need redundancy, I do want to sort of set this up so that I don't have any downtime, or you've had a failure and realize that you need to have better backups or something to that effect, then you just buy another node, connect the two, and check a box and say, replicate, and it turns it into a dual node system, and off you go. And once you go dual node, you don't go back, but most people don't want to. The long answer is yes, and very easily to both of those.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So in summary, we've simplified edge infrastructure management with ZTC. It really is a nice compact package that's extremely reliable and easy to deploy, and allows you to provide a resilient environment for that edge manufacturing solution without having a whole lot of IT skills required. And if you're in IT, you know, both this and the FTServer really kind of make your job easier anyway, because by taking a lot of that configuration requirement and building it into the system itself so that it does it on its own, when you're called in, you don't have to spend, you know, hours and hours trying to figure out what happened and get everything back and running, and deal with trying to make sure your manufacturing is back up, either processing whatever it is they process. So we make it much more simple and easier to do on a long-term basis. Again, 24/7, 365 support, and replacement components are included with that support contract. So, you know, once you're up and running, you're good to go for long term. If you want to look at, you know, a couple of industry examples of where we are and who's deployed our applications, you've got Dairy Farmers of America, a lot of food and bev type of scenarios and customers. We are in Washington Gas, Columbia Pipeline, so oil and gas is a big focus for us, as well as continuous delivery of water, wastewater, and then of course I mentioned public safety earlier. We do a lot with them, as well as retail, packaging, distribution. You know, again, they choose us because no major IT skills required, no unplanned downtime, and reduced TCO. Water, wastewater is really one that we've had a lot of success in, because they are on tight budgets. So when they spend the money, they need to make sure that it's wise money, and they found that we can make their job much easier. Again, I talked a little bit about DFA and the fact they standardize on our solution along with the Rockwell software in order to make their stuff go. Then we talked about oil and gas, whether it's upstream, midstream, or downstream. We're in everywhere, and why? Because it's fault tolerant, and typically they need that ease of deployment because of where their terminals are located and how hard it is to kind of get, and how long it takes to get to some of those places. If you're a machine builder or an OEM, we really are targeting ZTC to you, because typically you're on the hook for whatever computer's in there. And if you've got to do remote management and remote access to a computer, getting it up and running in your machine, we can make that easier because of our hot swap capabilities, whether it's FTServer or ZTC. Material handling, process equipment, packaging, we're all over it. And that's that. So I appreciate everybody's time. Any questions about anything at this point?
Yes, so we have a follow-up here from Justin. I'm just going to read through this here. He just posted it. Clusters require licensing for all servers. Licensing cost may include Windows and Server OS and clients, virtual platforms licensing, Rockwell software licensing, etc. It sounds like the Stratus system only requires one set of licensing for the entire redundant system. Is this correct?
Yes, that is correct. And when you're doing a comparison of total cost of ownership between whether it's an FTServer or ZTC compared to a traditional cluster or what have you, you've got to take licensing cost into account as well. You know, as Justin mentioned, you've got a VMware license on each node in a cluster, and then you've got multiple Microsoft licenses duplicated on each node for the virtual machines. And that's because Microsoft requires any OS license for a virtual machine to be available on any machine that VM can run on. So if you've got 3 nodes in a cluster, each VM has to have a license available on each node. So it has to, in a 3-node cluster, you've got 3 licenses for that one VM. So as I said earlier, 6 VMs give you 18 licenses from Microsoft. And that's so you have what's called license mobility. And that allows that license and that VM to move across the virtual machine or the virtual hosts at will whenever it's needed to. And if something fails, it can restart over here, and then you can move it back when you fix it. If you don't have that license mobility, you're stuck and cannot move anything except every 90 days. And so that's just the way Microsoft licensed their product. With FTServer and as well as ZTC, because ZTC is considered a single platform as well, you only need to license your environments one time. And so you've got one copy of VMware, and we use the free version because we don't use all the replication tools that VMware offers. So we get the cheap one. And then you get one copy of Microsoft Server license for each VM inside that system. And so it's just when you look at the total cost of the solution, it's not just hardware, it's all the licensing and all the maintenance that you have to go with that you need to take into consideration.
That's great. Thank you. That's very good information. We'll give just a few more minutes here to see if anyone has some follow-up questions for you. And while we wait, I'd just like to remind you all that you can reach out to us even after this live stream has ended at the email address there on the screen, macandmaclive@nc-mc.com. Just be sure to let us know the name of the session in your email. And if you're watching this as a recording, this is a great way to get in touch with us, and we'll put you in contact with a specialist in your region. Okay, I don't see any further questions in our comments section, so I'd like to thank you, Muncie, for a wonderful presentation here today. And thank you to Justin for being a resource for us out in the comments section. And thank you to everyone who has joined us here on the live stream today. We hope that this session was informative and engaging for you. Remember to subscribe to the McNaughton-McKay YouTube channel for more industry content, and we look forward to seeing you live again soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.